I know that for many this day is long overdue. For years, the victims of these awful crimes were ignored. First abused by vile predators, they then found themselves belittled and even blamed when it was justice they were owed. In January, my predecessor asked Baroness Casey of Blackstock, who's here with us today, to conduct a national audit on group-based child exploitation and abuse. With devastating clarity, Baroness Casey revealed the horror that lies behind that jargonistic term. It is vital we too call crimes what they were. Multiple sexual assaults committed by multiple men on multiple occasions. Children were subjected to beatings and gang rapes. Many contracted sexually transmitted infections. Some were forced to have abortions. Others had their children taken from them. But it was not just these awful crimes that now shame us. There was also an abject failure by the state in its many forms to fulfil its most basic duty: protecting the young and vulnerable. Worse still, some in positions of power turned a blind eye to the horror, even covered it up. Despite a shameful lack of national data, Baroness Casey was clear that in some local areas where data was available, and I quote, disproportionate numbers of men from Asian ethnic background were amongst the suspects. Like every member of my community I know, I am horrified by the sickening acts of a minority of evil men, as well as those in positions of authority who look the other way, must not be allowed to marginalise or demonise entire communities of law-abiding citizens. What is required now is a moment of reckoning. We must cast fresh light on this topic. In her audit, Baroness Casey called for a national inquiry. In June, the government accepted that recommendation. And today, I can announce the chair and panel that will form the leadership of the inquiry and a draft of the inquiry terms of reference. The inquiry will be chaired by Baroness Anne Longfield. As many in this place will know, Baroness Longfield was the Children's Commissioner from 2015 to 2021. She has devoted her life to children's rights, including running a charity supporting and protecting young people and working for Prime Ministers of different political parties. In recognition of her service, Baroness Longfield was elevated to the Lords earlier this year. At that point, she took the Labour whip. On taking this appointment, she will now resign. Alongside her, I can also announce her two fellow panellists. The first is Zoe Billingham, CBE. Zoe is a former inspector at His Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary and currently serves as chair of Norfolk and Suffolk NHS Foundation Trust. She brings expertise in safeguarding and policing, specifically in holding forces to account. The second panellist is Eleanor Kelly, CBE. Eleanor is the former chief executive of Southwark Council. In 2017, she supported the survivors of the London Bridge terrorist attacks and the victims of the Grenfell Tower fire of the same year. Together, the chair and panel bring deep experience of championing children's rights, knowledge of policing and local government, and crucially, a proven track record of holding powerful institutions to account. Each individual was recommended by Baroness Casey, and the recommendation followed recent engagement with victims. The first thing the chair and panel will do, alongside Baroness Casey, is meet with victims later this week. Today, we also published the draft terms of reference, which I will place in the Library of the House. Baroness Casey was clear that the inquiry must be time limited to ensure that justice is swift for those who have already waited too long. For that reason, it will be completed within 3 years, supported by a £65 million budget. The inquiry will be a series of local investigations overseen by a national panel with full statutory powers. Baroness Longfield has confirmed that Oldham will have a local investigation. The chair and panel will determine the other locations in due course, and no area will be able to resist a local investigation. These terms of reference are clear on a number of vital issues. The inquiry is focused specifically on child sexual abuse committed by grooming gangs. It will consider explicitly the background of offenders, including their ethnicity and religion, and whether the authorities failed to properly investigate what happened out of a misplaced desire to protect community cohesion. The inquiry will act without fear or favour, identifying individual, institutional and systemic failure, inadequate organisational responses and failures of leadership. It will also work hand in hand with the police. Come to light, be that the perpetrators or those who covered up their crimes, the inquiry will pass evidence to law enforcement so they can take forward any further prosecutions and put more of these evil men behind bars. The inquiry must and will place victims and survivors at the forefront, with a charter setting out how they will participate and how their views, experiences and testimony will shape the inquiry's work. I have said already the terms are in draft form. The Chair will now consult on them with victims and other stakeholders, and they will be confirmed no later than March, when the inquiry can begin its work in earnest. Alongside launching this inquiry, Baroness Casey's audit contained a number of other recommendations, which the Government accepted in full. As the inquiry begins its work, we continue righting these wrongs. I can announce today that I have commissioned new research from UK Research and Innovation to rectify the unacceptable gaps in our understanding of perpetrators' backgrounds and motivations, including their ethnicity and religion. My predecessor wrote to all police forces, calling on them to improve the collection of ethnicity data. And while the Home Secretary does not currently have the power to mandate that this is collected, I will rectify this by legislating at the earliest possible opportunity. The Department for Education is currently interrogating gaps in children in need data identified in the audit, which is to underreport the scale of the crisis. Right on the Education Secretary will soon publish the findings of an urgent review of this data conducted by her department. Across government, the audit identified that poor data sharing continues to put children at risk. As a result, we are introducing a legal duty for information sharing between safeguarding partners. We are creating a unique identifier for each child, linking all data across government, and we are upgrading technology to ensure data can be shared across agencies. The audit also identified an absurdity in our legal system that saw some child rapists convicted of lesser crimes. As a result, we are changing the law to make clear that children cannot consent when they have been raped by an adult, and so perpetrators are charged for the hideous crime they have in fact committed. The law has protected abusers from the consequences of their crimes. It has too often punished victims. Some survivors were convicted for crimes they had been coerced into, continuing their trauma to this day. We are already legislating in the Crime and Policing Bill to disregard offences related to prostitution. And the Ministry of Justice is now working with the Criminal Cases Review Commission to ensure that they are resourced to review applications from individuals who believe that they were wrongly criminalised. The national audit identified further weaknesses in relation to taxi licensing. Abusers were applied for licences in areas where controls were lax to circumvent protection put in place by local councils to tackle abuse. My right honourable friend, the Transport Secretary, will soon be legislating to close this dangerous loophole in the regulation of taxis. The audit is clear that justice has not been done. Baroness Casey requested that a new national police investigation was required to bring offenders to justice. Last month, the National Crime Agency launched Operation Beacon Port, reviewing previously closed cases of child sexual exploitation. It has already flagged more than 1,200 cases for potential reinvestigation, more than 200 of which are high-priority cases of rape. The evil men who committed these crimes and thought they got away with it will find they have nowhere to hide. The audit finally called on the government to fund the delivery of its recommendations. Alongside investment in the inquiry itself, I can announce today that a further £3.65 million will be committed this year to the policing operation, survivor support and research into grooming gangs. This work, Madam Deputy Speaker, is essential. But without truth, there can be no justice. Today, I have announced the chair and panel of an inquiry which will shine a bright light on this dark moment in our history. I will do so alongside the victims of these awful crimes who have waited too long to see justice done. This inquiry is theirs, not ours. So I call on all those present to put politics aside for a moment and to support this chair and her panel in the pursuit of truth and justice. And I commend this statement to the House.
Shadow Home Secretary.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Let us remember victims are at the heart of this. Young girls, some only 10 years old, were groomed and gang raped by men of mainly Pakistani origin. Girls like Jane, just 12 years old when she was raped by an illegal immigrant. When she was found by police, instead of arresting the rapist, they arrested Jane. Anna, only 15 years old, repeatedly told social workers that she had been gang raped, but instead of helping her, they allowed her to marry her main abuser in an Islamic ceremony, attended by the very social worker who should have protected her. Last week, sentencing reports were published on several of these terrible cases. I warn the House, some of these are extremely graphic. One perpetrator, Mohammed Karar, raped a 12-year-old girl, and when she tried to fight back, he hit her with a baseball bat and then inserted the handle into her vagina. He also injected her with heroin and forced her to take crack cocaine. Another man, Arshad Hussain, viciously beat a young girl, stubbed out a cigarette on her chest, tied her up. She was then repeatedly raped by numerous different Asian men. The same man, Arshad Hussain, also called him who had been raped and abused since the age of just 7, quotes, white trash. He said Asian girls would not do what he was forcing her to do. There was an explicit racial element to his crime. He was raping his victim because she was white. The identity of the majority of the perpetrators is something that should not be hidden. A 2020 study by academics at the universities of Southampton and Reading reviewed 498 grooming gang convictions. They found 83% of the perpetrators were of Muslim background, mainly specifically of Pakistani heritage. The Casey report and the Telford report made similar observations. The fact is, these crimes were deliberately covered up by those in authority who were more interested in so-called community relations and in avoiding being called racist than they were in protecting young girls. I spoke to a retired police officer who was told by a serving chief superintendent to stop investigating abuse by Pakistani origin taxi drivers in Bradford. The local police did not want to defend Bradford's Muslim community. And I've sent the name of that officer to the police for investigation. A former Labour MP, Simon Danchuk, was even told by the then chair of the Parliamentary Labour Party to stop asking questions to avoid antagonising the Muslim community in his town. Yet when the need for a national inquiry into this was raised in January, the Prime Minister disgracefully smeared those calling for an inquiry as, quotes, far right. What the Prime Minister claimed was a far-right bandwagon in January had become government policy by June. So will the Home Secretary please apologise on behalf of the Prime Minister for what he said last January? The truth is, this should not have taken several months and the threat of a vote in Parliament to agree with this inquiry in the first place, and it should not have taken another 6 months to appoint a chair. That is what the survivors and their families told me yesterday. One of the most disturbing elements of this scandal is the deliberate cover-up of these crimes, as I've said. Can the Home Secretary assure the House that those in authority who covered up crimes will be prosecuted for the offence of misconduct in public office and will ensure the inquiry refers such witnesses to the police for investigation. Can she confirm the inquiry will formally start in March of 2026 and that the final report will be published publicly 3 years later in March 2029? We've not yet seen the terms of reference. Survivors and their families, who I met yesterday, are concerned the scope of this inquiry may be too broad. So will the Secretary confirm it will focus specifically on localised group-based grooming gangs, and it will analyse the ethnicity and religious background of the perpetrators? It mentions local inquiries sitting underneath the national inquiry. Can she also specifically confirm that those local inquiries will be completely independent of those bodies they are investigating, particularly independent of local councils and independent of local police forces? They can't be allowed to investigate themselves. Will the Home Secretary also confirm parents of survivors and victims will be able to serve on the panel as well? I spoke yesterday to 2 parents of survivors who felt they'd been excluded from the previous panels. Madam Deputy Speaker, for many survivors and victims, the truth has been hidden for far too long. These crimes were covered up because those in authority were more concerned about social community relations and avoiding being called racist than they were about protecting young children. That was an abject moral failure. The truth, at last, must come out.
Secretary.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and can I thank the Shadow Secretary of State for his remarks. Let me just say, as he was reading out excerpts from some of the court transcripts that have been made public, I, like other members in the House, have read some of those transcripts. They do make for truly horrifying reading, and they are a reminder, the darkest reminder of all, perhaps, for everyone in this House and beyond, that it is absolutely essential that we all collectively do right by the victims who have had such unimaginable horrors inflicted upon them, and I hope that that is the spirit in which we will all be able to engage across this House as the inquiry gets up and running and continues its work. I also want to say, Madam Deputy Speaker, I think this is a moment to elevate, now that we have a chair and panel in place, to elevate this discussion beyond our usual trade-offs of party politics across this dispatch box. The Shadow Secretary of State has a critique of the government I will robustly defend, the government of which I am a part. Have always been focused on the outcome of justice and truth for victims, less so the process itself, but it was this government that asked Baroness came to do her national audit. She followed the evidence and recommended this national inquiry, and that is what we are doing, and that is what we have supported. But now that we have a chair and a panel, I just think that this is a moment, if we're going to do right by the victims, who are a diverse cohort of people who will have different views and who will all feel, regardless of where they stand on this inquiry itself, some degree of anxiety about what will happen next, and we'll need some reassurance that we can rise above our usual political discourse and unite in support for the chair and panel as they do this important work. Let me say, for most of his detailed questions, the answer is a straightforward yes. On scope, let me just reassure him there is no dilution of the scope, and it is very clearly focused on exactly the problem that was named by Baroness Casey in her national audit. To the extent that the inquiry finds evidence of any potential misconduct in public office or other breaches of the law, of course, they are working very closely with our partners in law enforcement. The whole point for having this inquiry is to make sure that actions that result from these investigations and that people are properly held to account, including by facing the full force of the law. I'm sure that once the inquiry reports, we'll have other things to say, potentially even about strength of the law as well. So I think it's important we let the inquiry do their work, but they are not going to be held back making any findings that lead to further investigations and accountability legal system. Let me also confirm to him on timings. March, the draft terms of reference will be confirmed no later than March. It could come a little earlier. 3 months for the draft terms of reference, and then up to 3 years for the inquiry to conclude. So no later than 2020, not March 29, with the report as well. And that is the timetable that the chair and the panel members have signed up on the local investigations. course, it's right, they won't be investigating themselves. The work of the local investigation will be under the offices of the chair and her panel, and they will be making sure that those investigations are held by them to the standard they will set and follow themselves, and they will also decide which other areas they wish to be included in these local investigations, and I'm sure members will want to make representations to them, but no area in England or Wales will be able to resist having a local investigation under the auspices of this inquiry, which of course has all of the statutory powers that you would expect such an inquiry to have. I think, Madam Deputy Speaker, I've dealt with the issues that the Shadow Secretary of State has raised, but I do look forward to, I hope, a more constructive dialogue between us as the inquiry gets underway.
Champion.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Madam Deputy Speaker, as you know, I've spent 13 years researching this most evil of crimes, so I don't know how or where to start, but let me boil it down to a couple of things. One, I have no idea why those paid to protect children didn't do that, and so I hope the inquiry both finds that out and makes sure there is no way that happens again. Two, I believe the scale of this is in literally every town, every city, every village in the United Kingdom, and so I hope the inquiry and the NCA work is able to cover all of that. But then that brings me to my substantive, which is this is going to cost a lot of money. Every case you find will need to be an investigation, but equally local authorities will have to put child protection measures in place. In Rotherham, all of that money has come from the local authority. So can the Home Secretary assure us that our local authorities will have child protection money and our police forces will have the resources they need to get the prosecutions we have to see?
Secretary.
Well, I thank my honourable friend, and I pay tribute to her long work exposing many of the issues herself in her own area that will now be the subject of the national inquiry. She's right, it is utterly shocking and defies comprehension that people whose only job was to look after vulnerable children failed their duty to those children, and the inquiry will ensure that they face ultimate accountability for their failures. I hear the point about the inquiry covering every area. There is no doubt that child abuse occurs in every part of the country. One of the recommendations that Baroness Casey made was that the inquiry should be time limited because so many of the victims and survivors have waited so long for a proper measure of justice in their cases, and she recognised that there is therefore a necessary trade-off between doing something that is time limited and being able to go to every single area. But I'm sure the inquiry, the chair and the panel will engage constructively with members across this House to make sure they get to the right areas and can draw the lessons that will then lead to national recommendations. So even if the lessons come from a small cohort of areas, all of the recommendations will apply absolutely everywhere. And the government has already invested billions in child protection measures already in this Parliament, but I recognise the call she has made, and I'm sure that when the recommendations are made, the government will respond on money in due course.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Max Wilkinson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The crimes that we've heard about are despicable and sickening. They were first reported in the press more than 20 years ago. The victims have already waited far too long for justice, so we welcome today's announcement. And we welcome other details in the statement, including reforms to ensure children can be considered to have consented to sexual activity with adults. The fact that that was the case is a shame on our nation. And we welcome moves to close loopholes in tax pricing and points made about data collection too. There are some questions that remain about this process. How will the government ensure the inquiry remains fully independent and free from political influence and pressures, regardless of those strong pressures that they will face, including from within this House, that it runs to the table? In light of the recent resignations from the previous panel, is still in touch with those women to offer them the chance to rejoin this process, and now it is gaining some pace. Can the Home Secretary confirm what steps the inquiry will take to maintain the trust of the victims and their families? On the matter of the case in reviews, will she commit to implementing all the previous recommendations from previous reports? Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, the national audit highlighted the incompleteness of data, but it was suggestive of concerning trends related to the modes of organisation and how those relate to the ethnicity, particularly in those areas where police were recording appropriate data. The Home Secretary rightly mentioned cohesion in her statement. How will this inquiry avoid stigmatising entire communities and undermining efforts to improve cohesion in the subject and in others adjacent, while thoroughly investigating the matter, ensuring that victims get the justice that they deserve?
I thank the Liberal Democrat spokesman for his remarks. Let me reassure him. I think the track records of the chair and the two panel members speak for themselves. These are three women who have a long track record of holding authorities to account. Done so in the case of Baroness Longfield, the chair, under different political parties. I think they have shown in their work that they are afraid of whoever the political masters might be when it comes to holding our police forces, local authorities or other organisations to account. So I think we should take some encouragement from their track record, and I know that Baroness Casey recommended these individuals because of their track record and their experience in holding authority to account, and I'm sure they'll bring all of that experience there as they conduct the work of the national inquiry now. As for the panel of victims and survivors, they've been written to by the chair panel today. The particular panel that was set up in order to help get the inquiry going will now necessarily disband because the inquiry will now get up and running. However, the inquiry will itself have a victims charter that will set out the way that the inquiry will ensure that victims and survivors are at the heart of this process and they feel a sense of confidence and trust in the work that the inquiry is doing. On earlier recommendations from previous reports, you will know that we are commencing our work on all of the recommendations made by Baroness Casey in her national audit. We continue our work in implementing the recommendations made by the ICSA inquiry, and there will be more announcements to come later this week and next on those, which I will preempt in late today. And let me just say, on avoiding stigmatising entire communities, I totally hear and understand the point that he's making. It's obviously of many members, including myself, in this House. But let me say to him, in my experience, every community wants these people locked up, wants these individuals, these vile rapists, to face the full force of the law. And perhaps those who feel stigmatised by the behaviour of criminals might even feel more strongly than others. But I think it's in everyone's interest to make sure that we get to the truth. There is never anything to be afraid of. The truth, once we've established truth, justice can take place and the society can learn lessons for the future.
Jim McMahon.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The announcement of the panel to reference and timelines are welcome. Survivors have waited to engage in the formal process, and important for them and for others yet to come forward. It leaves no stone left unturned. It's not restricted by time, and it follows the evidence wherever it may lead. We've heard quite a lot about and that being an important characteristic of the form of abuse that we're talking about here, but can we not lose sight of class? Of course, perpetrators were by and large Pakistani men, but the social workers were not, the police officers were not, and they had a view of these girls that I think absolutely determined how they were treated. But can I ask the Home Secretary to confirm that the National Inquiry format, together with deep dives, will ensure that cross-border offending, transcending local authority and police boundaries, will be covered and not allowed to fall through the net?
Let me reassure my honourable friend, absolutely on the point he makes, cross-border offending, that will not be allowed to slip through the net, and that is something that the Chair and her panel members have already...
It's almost o'clock. You are watching Sky News. We're listening to the House of Commons, who are talking about the grooming gangs inquiry. Secretary there, Shabana Mahmood.
Society took of the girls that were raped and abused in this way were seen by many parts of society, and some in local authorities, some in elsewhere as well, as essentially white trash, that these girls were somehow not really children, that they were making decisions as if they were in control of their lives, that they were not victims of coercion and serious abuse. And that is why this process is so essential, so that that moment of reckoning that is required because of this shocking scandal is true and fair to the victims in every way. So criminal justice response goes to the vile perpetrators of the crime, but also to those in our state institutions that are thoroughly these women, these girls down.
The Home Committee, Dame Karen Brown.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy. And can I thank the Home Secretary for her statement and welcome the appointment of the Noble Baroness Longfield as chair of the panel. She is has a great track record, and I've worked with her myself over many years, and I'm sure she'll do a very thorough job. I'm also very grateful that victims are being put at the centre of this inquiry. This is about the victims. We cannot forget the terrible suffering that they've had, and they must be front and centre of everything that's done by the inquiry. But can I ask the Home Secretary around what will happen if during one of the local inquiries some new evidence or new issue arises? Will it be possible to go back and look at previous inquiries? Will it be possible to even go back and look at those inquiries that have already completed locally, but perhaps certain issues were not identified that do come along as part of this work?
Well, let me thank the chair of the Home Affairs Select Committee for her comments and her question. Let me assure her victims and survivors will be at the heart of the inquiry. That is clear in the draft terms of reference, and the fact that there will be a charter that the chair and the panel will create, I think, will give some comfort to victims and survivors as to how they will be able to inform the work of the inquiry and also give them some comfort about the trust and confidence that they can place in the process as well, both of which I think are very much necessary. In terms of evidence, in the end, the inquiry has to go where the evidence takes them. What I am sure of is that they have the freedom to pursue that evidence wherever it may lead and then make their recommendations. That could mean new criminal cases are pursued. It could mean other action against public authority figures. It could mean that there are gaps in the law that need to be filled as well. But what I'm sure is that the terms of reference and consult, and if people feel they need to be strengthened, I'm sure they can engage with the chair and the panel to do so. There will be a period of consultation. Our intention is to make sure that this inquiry does that should have always been done, which is make sure that the criminal justice system is fit for purpose, but that there is accountability for everyone else who let these girls down.
Paul Wall.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I strongly welcome the appointment of Anne Longfield as the chair of this new independent inquiry into national grooming gangs. The key to find the facts and the evidence wherever it leads, as you just said. During the trial of some of the Rochdale child rapists earlier this year, the prosecution said that the abuse of the girls took place, and I quote, under the noses of social workers and others who should have done more to protect them. Does the Home Secretary agree that we need to hold to account anyone who ignored these crimes, and that no council, no police officer, no social worker, no racial group should ever be exempt from the scrutiny of this new inquiry?
My honourable friend is absolutely right, and I strongly endorse every point that he has just made. There is no place to hide those who hurt these girls and those who let them down and allowed them to be hurt. And it is important that this inquiry finally provides us, all of us as a country, with the answers that we need so that we learn those lessons, bring a measure of justice to the victims in this case, and make sure that this never happens again.
Father of the House, Sir Edward Lee.
The Home Secretary knows that I know her personally, and she's a devout Muslim lady.
So the Home Secretary there, Shabana Mahmood, outlining the terms of reference for this report into child grooming gangs, also announcing who will head it up. As Jason Farrell revealed just an hour ago, Baroness Anne Longfield, who formerly was Children's Commissioner, assisted by Billingham and Eleanor, and it will look at multiple sexual assaults by multiple men on multiple occasions, and will look put the children who have been affected at the heart of it, and the authorities who turned a blind eye. Let's talk to our Home Editor, Jason Farrell. We heard some very strong testimony there in the Commons, didn't we, Jason, from Chris Philp, but also the Home Secretary saying that there will be no stone left unturned in this report. Do you think it will hearten those who've been the victims of this abuse, that it will get to the bottom of it?
I think there are mixed feelings from the people that I've just gauged, some reaction from people that I've been dealing with on this one. I think that there is no question that Anne Longfield has a hugely credible record in child protection. As Children's Commissioner, she was incredibly vocal. She raised a lot of concerns in a lot of areas that weren't being properly looked at, such as children being exploited into county lines drug dealing. There's this slight thing hanging over her that she's a Labour peer. There was this feeling that it could be someone independent. It was interesting, actually, that we didn't hear Chris Philp bring that up, and we didn't hear him complain, as he had said only the day before, that it should be a judge. I think that is just a credit to the huge credibility of Anne Longfield. She's not a judge, but he didn't seem to raise that. I have had people saying she should be independent of political party. Anne Longfield is Labour linked, and she could have been more outspoken on grooming. Survivors, campaigners won't trust her, says one person. I've got another survivor here who's responded to me saying she's done amazing work. I just don't see how this is independent when she's literally spent her whole life representing Labour. She's been in the Labour government and is a Labour peer in the House of Lords. That's far from independent. There are those concerns that have been raised by people, but I think nonetheless, it's worth pointing out, of course, that she was appointed Commissioner for Children, Theresa May, back in 2015 as Home Secretary. So she has worked with the Conservative Party well, and that perhaps will help. She's going to go and meet the panel tomorrow. They will talk around the terms of reference. This is the panel of survivors. And we also heard, she's going to have the help of Zoe Billingham, who's an Inspector of Constabulary, or was a former Inspector of Constabulary, and Eleanor Kelly, who's a former Executive of Southwark. So an all-female team leading this inquiry. And then, I think time will tell whether she wins the trust of the other survivors and whether there are objections raised. But I got the sense there from Chris Philp that they're going to see how this pans out. And he was asking for those assurances around the scope of this inquiry and saying, it's not going to be diluted, it's not going to be widened. And again, you heard from the Home Secretary saying that the scope wouldn't be diluted, and reassuring Chris Philp that if there was misconduct found, that would lead to prosecutions. So the things that were being asked, therefore, by the Conservative Party seem to be getting reassurance on that. But of course, we also heard Chris Philp make the point that I think the Labour Party will be hit round the head time and again about, which is, of course, that they didn't initially call the inquiry at the beginning of the year. They accused Conservatives of jumping on a far bandwagon, as Chris Philp put it. And I think for as long as this goes on, that is something that the Conservatives will always hold against the party. They didn't act sooner. Of course, Labour say, well, they just needed time to hear from Louise Casey and do her rapid review and for her to make that decision whether it was necessary to call this national inquiry. And she said it was. And it is notable that Louise Casey, who I think does have the trust of survivors and victims, that Louise Casey will also sort of oversee and sit alongside this and ensure that it does go in the direction that she set out in her rapid review in the summer.
OK, Jason, thank you very much. Now, patients with a previously untreatable form of aggressive leukemia are now living disease-free after receiving a world first in gene therapy. 16-year-old Melissa Tapley became the first patient to have the experimental treatment after being diagnosed with an aggressive form of leukemia. She has since remained healthy. Well, let's bring in Dr. Tanya Dexter, Senior Medical Officer for the UK stem cell charity Anthony Nolan. And very good to talk to you today. This is an incredible story. Explain to us how this gene therapy works.
Well, it's amazing, really. The scientists have been able to use T cells, which is one of the cells of the immune system, and they came from our amazing Anthony Nolan donors, and they edited the single bases within the genes of these cells to make them target this specific type of leukemia. And this was no simple task. This type of leukemia comes from the T cells too. So they very cleverly had to edit these genes so that they could attack the leukemic cells and not kill each other, essentially.
And the astonishing results are 64% of people who have had this therapy remain disease-free. Did you have any idea that it would be this successful?
No, I mean, I think it's really important to remember that these patients have a really difficult to treat condition, and they'd often had a number of treatments in the past, a transplant before, that hadn't been able treat their condition. And using this treatment has given hope to patients who unfortunately may not have been able to be treated for their leukemia.
Let me assure her that there will be a progress update very, very soon.
Murray.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome this significant set of announcements from the Home Secretary and the strong panel members appointed. The Home Secretary will be aware that the Scottish Government has finally announced a review of grooming gangs in Scotland. The Chair, Alexis Jay, has said Scotland does not grasp the scale
Let me absolutely give her that reassurance, and I hope the progress the government is making in implementing previous recommendations give her and others some more of that reassurance. In the end, I think we prove ourselves to victims and survivors here by doing and by taking the action that is so desperately needed, both from older recommendations and from the new ones that will come.
Sir Julian Lewis.
Very few of us here today were present in 2003 when then MP for Keighley, Mrs Anne Cryer, a courageous Labour member on the left of her party, spoke out about these grooming gangs. For her troubles, she was smeared as a racist, she was shunned, and she was threatened to the point at which she had to have safety devices and emergency alarms installed in her home. Will the Home Secretary join with me in paying tribute to her courage? Belatedly, it has never received any recognition of which I'm aware. And does she not think that Anne Cryer might even now have some insights to share with an inquiry as to what it's like when the people who are supposed to be protecting people close ranks to protect the offenders instead?
Secretary.
Well, let me right the wrong immediately in terms of Anne not having the recognition that she deserves, and let me pay some tribute to the work that she did in exposing the crimes themselves, but also the state failure that meant that so many people who are supposed to keep young girls safe were looking the other way. He's absolutely right. It took immense courage for Anne to speak out all those years ago, and she had herself deep experience and expertise here, which I'm sure the Baroness Longfield and others will want to avail themselves of. It can be a low road when you're exposing this kind of criminality, but also when you're holding to account other parts of the state that might not want to face up to what they have done. She walked that lonely road, and we're only here today with the knowledge that we have because of the work she started.
Luke Meyer.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. There's a concerning tendency, I think, to view these issues as historic when, in likelihood, there are working class children being failed by institutions right now all across our country. And so can the Home Secretary confirm that the inquiry will be able to respond to new information as it comes forward? And in terms of the behaviour of institutions, can the Home Secretary confirm that the inquiry will be able to offer that as well, and actionable recommendations will be included to stop these failings happening again?
Home Secretary.
Let me say yes to him on both of those counts and give him that reassurance that he has sought. Is absolutely the case that as new information comes to light, the inquiry will be able to pursue that, and will work very closely with law enforcement and others to make sure that that happens. He is right, sadly, devastatingly, undoubtedly the case that working class children are once again today being let down and being hurt because those who should have kept them safe are not keeping them safe, and that is why this government will never stop in the work across government to keep the children of our country safe.
Will also.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome the Home Secretary's statement and the progress on this inquiry. My local authority, Surrey County Council, has at best been slow to acknowledge their failures in child safeguarding in terms of the case of injury from Woking. How will the government ensure that both police forces and local authorities fully cooperate with this inquiry, particularly in areas with a history of underreporting, cover-up and a lack of openness and transparency?
Home Secretary.
Well, let me say to us that no local authority, whoever, will be able to resist a local investigation if that is what the chair and the panellists wish to occur. And once they are underway with their local investigations, they will in the end national level findings and recommendations the government will then respond to. So I would envisage that in the end, whether an area is part of a local investigation or not, every area across England and Wales will have lessons to learn and legal duties that they will have to fulfil. And I am sure that once the inquiry is reviewed, there will be potentially further legislation or other action that will be taken.
Chris Finn.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Secretary of State for her statement today. I particularly welcome the part about closing the loophole with regards to taxi regulations. In my first outing in this place, I spoke about and the problems by the cross-border hiring. Can I ask the Secretary of State to work with her colleagues in the Department of Transport, I see one on the front bench now, to ensure that this legislation gets through and those people that are using taxis across the country feel safe?
well, firstly, pay tribute to my honourable friend and the work that he has done on taxi regulation. I would happily make sure that we keep discussing with him the measures that we are bringing forward. And let me provide him with the assurance that we are working very closely with our colleagues in the Transport Department to make sure that the legislation, the English Pollution Bill, is absolutely fit for purpose and does exactly what he and I would want it to do.
John Lamont.
Thank you very much. The Scottish Government announced a review of the grooming gangs evidence in Scotland. This falls short of a full inquiry and disappoints many of the victims. Now, I've asked for this before, but please, will this UK government extend its inquiry to the whole of the UK so that the victims of these appalling crimes get the justice that they deserve? Grooming gangs operate in all parts of the UK, so this inquiry.
Home Secretary.
Well, look, I hear the absolute force with which the point is made, and I have a lot of sympathy with what the honourable member said and what my own colleagues from Scotland have said in relation to the fact that grooming gangs do not respect boundaries, and that is, I know that the inquiry chair and panel will also take on board. Many of the public authorities that have failed children sit within devolved departments, and so necessarily in England and Wales inquiry primarily, but I would expect there to be discussions with colleagues in the Scottish Government and to make sure that all of the lessons are learnt across the whole of the United Kingdom, because in the end these are all our children and we all have a responsibility to keep them safe.
Dr. Scott Arthur.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I do thank the Secretary of State for her statement and also the Minister for Safeguarding for the work she's done in this area over many years. What should show us is so many people for many years for the announcement we've heard today. And I think, as I think the member for New Forest East hinted, some MPs were actually born after some of these offences took place. And it's an absolute disgrace that it's taken so long to get to this place. And it does come a week after, as we've heard, that the Scottish Government have been shamed into considering an own inquiry. And I do use that word, shamed, deliberately. But can I ask the Secretary of State, £65 million is a lot of money, but is it enough? Will more be made available if needed? And how will she keep herself updated and here in the Chamber updated on the progress of the inquiry, particularly the perspective of those survivors?
I thank my honourable friend. Look, it's an independent inquiry, so I think that there should be and there will be some necessary limits in my engagement with the chair and the panel, because it's an independent inquiry. They will go wherever the evidence takes them. I'm sure I will receive updates in terms of scale and making sure that we are within the 3 years that has been agreed as the timescale for this inquiry. Let me assure him I'm sure that the correct level of resources have been made available to ensure the inquiry can undertake its incredibly important work. And just so I hear the point on devolution, I won't repeat the earlier answers that I have given, but I hope that given the subject matter and the fact that it's of interest to all members in the House, regardless of the part of the Kingdom we come from, we are all doing everything we can to keep children in our country safe, that these lessons are learnt across the board by everyone.
Joshua Reynolds.
Can I ask the Home Secretary what steps the government are going to take across government to ensure that whilst this inquiry is going, the victims of these horrible crimes are being given proper support whilst this process is undergoing?
Home Secretary.
Yes, let me provide him with that reassurance. Firstly, because Operation Beacon Port is up and running, and that is the National Crime Agency work to bring what have been closed cases to take a fresh look at all perpetrators to justice. Separately also, once the inquiry is up and running, there will be a victims' charter which will set out the way in which the inquiry will engage with victims and survivors to give them the trust and confidence that they need and deserve.
Rupert Lowe.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Minister may know we've been running our own independent inquiry into the rape scandal, funded by over 20,000 concerned people. Our hearings are taking place in early February next year. We've made immense progress to date, with more to come. Will the Home Secretary meet with me to discuss how our work could potentially assist the national inquiry, which we all want and need to succeed without further delay, as the rapes are continuing today?
Well, let me say to him, there is only one statutory inquiry, and that is the one that this government has initiated, for the chair and panel of which I have announced today. Let me also encourage, if he has collected evidence under his own auspices that is relevant to either current, past criminal proceedings or other evidence of state failure, he should make that available to the statutory inquiry.
Presentation of Bill, Munira Wilson.
Special Educational Needs and Disabilities Education Profit Cap Bill.
Second reading what day?
Friday the 16th of January.
Friday the 16th of January. Which brings us to the 10-minute rule session. Dr. Al Pinkerton.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I beg to move that leave be given to bring a bill to place a duty on the Secretary of State to enter into negotiations with the European Union to agree a customs union between the United Kingdom and the European Union, and for Madam Deputy Speaker, up and down the country, businesses know it, the public feel it, and it's time that this House find the courage to lift our whispered voices and admit it. Brexit has been an abject economic failure. It's choked business and development, shattered economic resilience, strangled trade, shrunk the economy, and left every single one of us poorer. The economic benefits of Brexit were only ever an illusory mirage. The kind of shimmering promise you see in the desert in the midday heat. The kind of shimmering promise that lures you towards it, only to find it always, agonisingly, out of reach. A promise that dissipates altogether as the cool of the evening returns. Well, that chill has descended. And now we can see clearly that the promises of 2016 and the unready deals of 2021 were nothing more than lukewarm figments of political opportunists, sought, and in some cases still seek, advantage in populism, in fragmentation, and in fear. Far from taking back control, today our country feels more precarious than ever. We lurch from crisis to crisis, uncertain of who we are, what we stand for, and whether our children will be better off tomorrow than those who came before. For the buccaneering global Britain, the United Kingdom is today weaker and more isolated than any point in our recent history. Far from lowering food and living costs or slashing regulation, British businesses are now buried under 2 billion of red tape that stretch 15 times around the circumference of the earth, while the cost of living spirals even higher. Far from securing the transformative trading arrangements it promised, the government has delivered only Australia and New Zealand deals, worth a combined 0.1% to GDP, exposing British farmers to tougher competition and diluted protections. The India deal would add just 0.13%, and the much-heralded US agreement has shrunk from a growth opportunity into damage litigation following Trump tariffs. Meanwhile, Madam Deputy Speaker, we've erected new barriers with our largest market, the European Union, which continues to represent around half our global trade. The result? Tiny wins at the margins and a massive permanent hit at the core. That is not global Britain, nor was it ever going to be. It's economics by consolation prize, and the country is paying the price. Just last month, the National Bureau of Economic Research, a leading US think tank, published a decade-long analysis concluding that Brexit has reduced UK GDP by between 6% and 8%. The House of Commons Library says that Brexit is now costing the Treasury up to £90 billion every single year in lost tax rates, money that could be supporting our NHS, our defence spending, our public services. In practical terms, Madam Deputy Speaker, the average Briton today is between £2,700 and £3,700 worse off than if we had remained in the European Union. That is the reality of the Conservatives' botched Brexit deal. So let me put this plainly, Madam Deputy Speaker. The most dishonest campaign in modern British political history promised that Brexit would save £350 million a week. Instead, Brexit is now costing this country £250 million every single day. That is why we have the highest tax burden in 70 years. That is why families face sky-high bills. That is why we remain trapped in a cost of living crisis. This is the lived reality of the very working people the government claims to champion, but for whom it shows neither the resolve nor the political will to protect. And while the Conservative benches and those behind may chunter, it's the former leader and Prime Minister of the Conservative Party, Sir John Major, who noted Brexit is a flop. It will not now leap up from its deathbed. The Liberal Democrats believe the most effective route to sustainable economic growth in our country is to rebuild our relationship with the European Union. Our single most important trading partner. Just last week, the Prime Minister himself said, the Brexit deal has significantly hurt our economy. So for economic renewal, we must keep reducing frictions and move towards a closer relationship with the EU. That view was the Deputy Prime Minister, who described a customs union as an inevitable journey of travel. Well, my bill will propel us along that journey. It proposes a UK-EU customs union covering most goods with a formal mechanism for UK consultation on new EU trade deals that affect us. It would lift the man-made constraints that are strangling our small and medium-sized enterprises, many of which have stopped trading with Europe altogether. This bill is on the side of British business. The Federation of Small Business is clear. The greatest burdens fall on firms with the fewest resources to adapt. Crocus, one of the largest horticultural businesses in the UK, based in my Surrey Heath constituency, tell me that trade barriers are adding friction, inflating costs and causing damaging delays at our borders. Others warn British developed innovations risk being lifted and relocated to the continent. British ideas nurtured by British universities lost because electoral expediency was placed above economic reality. Now, even if the government stayed with their own self-defeating red lines, which merely replicate, of course, Theresa May's failed framework, a better deal with Europe could generate 25 billion extra per year for the Treasury. But the British public and British businesses want this government to go further and to go faster. At a time when ONS data shows rising numbers of young Britons leaving to work overseas, we have a national duty to support growth, to ease household pressure and give young people a compelling reason to build their futures here in the UK. As my party's former Northern Ireland spokesperson, I work across the political divide to consider the practical implications of the Windsor framework. Red lanes, green lanes, parcel movements across the Irish Sea. These barriers still hamper our internal market. A bespoke customs union would cut costs, smooth trade and reduce daily frictions for businesses in Northern Ireland. Those who value the union should see more clearly than anyone that cooperation strengthens it far more than isolation could. Madam Deputy Speaker, you do not strengthen the British economy by raising barriers on the market that takes 41% of our exports. You strengthen it by removing the barriers created so a weak Prime Minister could pretend to be tough. A survey by the British Chambers of Commerce shows nearly half of exporters cite customs procedures as their biggest barrier, and 39% cite documentation complexity. The message from businesses is unambiguous: reduce friction and unleash growth. Closer economic partnership with Europe is also a matter of our national security. Russia is defined by military expansionism and destabilisation. China grows more coercive and authoritarian by the year. Under a second Trump administration, the United States has demonstrated a willingness to threaten and coerce even its closest allies in pursuit of hemispheric preeminence. In the recent national security strategy, the US welcomes, and I quote, the growing influence of patriotic European parties, and says its goal should be to help Europe correct its cultural current trajectory. A clear signal of intent to interfere in allies' domestic politics. In an increasingly fractious multipolar world, we must stand closest with those who share our values, our trade and our common security. Madam Deputy Speaker, if we are serious about lifting this country out of stagnation, then we must get Britain growing again, get Britain exporting again, make Britain competitive again. A bespoke UK-EU customs union would cut red tape, unlock investment and restore certainty to British business. To sit on our hands is to choose stagnation. To oppose this bill is to prolong the cost of living crisis. To reject it is to hold back the small and medium-sized businesses that form the backbone of our economy. This House today has a clear choice. We can remain on a path of managed decline, or we can choose a future built on growth, on confidence and on opportunity. We can unleash once again the resilience, the creativity and innovation of British business. I commend this bill to the House.
The question is that the honourable member have leave to bring in the bill. I call Simon Hoare to speak for no more than 10 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I rise to oppose this bill. And yes, for those who know me, I did actually say oppose. The smelling salts are available through the usual channels, I am sure. I listened very intently to what my friend, the honourable member for Surrey Heath, had to say, and he said it with great passion and his typical eloquence. And he and I have worked together on Northern Irish issues and indeed others since he entered this place. It's a pleasure to do so, and I'm sorry that we are on different sides and separate sides this afternoon. It might be cheeky of me, Madam Deputy Speaker, to remind the honourable gentleman, of course, that it was his party, was the first party in this place that suggested a referendum on Britain's continued membership of the European Union. So that is something which is often missed of Liberal Democrat leaflets. Maybe they're too busy winning here to remind themselves of that. The honourable gentleman also declared, as a matter of fact, that the United Kingdom, post its membership of the European Union, was weaker and isolated. I obviously cannot fathom how he can arrive at that conclusion. The convening powers of the scenes outside Downing Street yesterday, when we stood with allies in support of Ukraine, the recent state visits of the US President and the German President, the fact that this country is head of a Commonwealth, a leading member of NATO and a permanent member of the Security Council, does not suggest to me a country which is weaker or more isolated. Far from it. The two are entirely separate things. There are 4 reasons, I believe, and I can say this, Madam Deputy Speaker, as somebody who voted to remain part of the European Union in the referendum and campaigned strongly to do so. But I accepted the result of the referendum, as most people on these benches did. And I say to the honourable member for Surrey Heath, who I woke up to hearing in my ear, now before anybody worries about that, I was in my bedroom and he was on Radio 4. At least that's the story I'm telling everybody. And he said that we could be like Turkey. But Turkey, that was the relationship that he was suggesting to the listeners of the programme. Turkey aligns trade policy and tariffs with an external tariff for industrial goods. They have no say on EU trade decisions, on agriculture or on services. And I say respectfully to the honourable gentleman and his colleagues, that in no way can meet the fundamental essay question that the electors of this country gave to us through that referendum decision. They wanted us to forge our own destiny. Whether that was going to be a path that was without ripple or stumblestone, nobody knew. That was the direction which the British people gave. And Democrats of good faith said, we will abide by that decision. The honourable gentleman's argument may be liberal small l, but democratic it certainly is not. There are 4 clear reasons, as I see it, why this proposal in the bill